So a quick recap, what we're trying to do here is determine the list of pages. And the tool we're going to use to determine that is Screaming Frog. So if you have less than 500 pages, pretty straightforward. You can use that. If you have more than 500 pages, having a tool like Screaming Frog will really save you some time. Another alternative, and we keep licenses for both, is Sitebulb. I actually find from a technical SEO standpoint, Sitebulb's it's a lot more powerful, and it's a little bit more user friendly. You can get a lot more insights a little bit quicker with Sitebulb, but having the both tools going is pretty strong play. I think Sitebulb runs about $50 a month. We're Screaming Frog, I want to say 200. I know they do it in pounds, and I haven't done the exchange rate, and I paid for it in January, so it's not a whole lot, and you're only paying annually. So crawl with Screaming Frog and filter out for the /blog, and then, like I said, remove taxonomy, pagination pages, author pages, that won't really necessarily return, generally don't rank. And what another hack that we'll use is in Screaming Frog, you can load up a page of URLs. And one thing we've been doing, just so we don't have to filter down, is if you've got something like Rank Math or Yoast running, you can go to your sitemap index and pick the post XML sitemap and crawl that instead of just crawling all the URLs in one go and then filtering it down. So this will give you all the pages in here. Not a pile of content. There's 18 pieces of content. The only one I would filter out is the /blog, because even if we were to determine that root page, the /blog did not drive any traffic, it's still the index of all the pages. So it serves a purpose outside of just SEO or general traffic. And when you're, I'll just quickly share what Screaming Frog would look like if we were going to load this up. So what I've done is I've taken my license off of Screaming Frog so you can actually see what it looks like if we were to dealing with the non-paid version. So we've switched this over. You can't see it right now, but on the Mac at the top, you can switch your mode from Spider, which is the default, to list. And then we're going to download from XML sitemap. We're going to paste that post XML sitemap. It will include a lot of the images because they're referenced there as well, but that's really straightforward to filter out, because when you crawl on the right-hand side, again, this is the free version. You can do all this with the free version. You don't have to pay at this point. If you've come down here, the more or less I have these filters, you can go down to internal, click HTML, and you're only going to get blog posts. If you go back to all, you're going to see all the individual the images that are included as well, but we're not really digging into those. So we're just going to export that HTML information. So we're going to export this information and stop sharing, share back on the other screen here. So we're going to use this Screaming Frog crawl not only just to determine this list of pages, but also we're going to feed other information like the H1. You can plug in things like title and description, which I don't have filtered in here right now. But when you're getting ready to refine, you can do it with that. So if you, what I tend to do is export this and plug it into SF Raw is the tab I'm using. I will post my steps, and I refer to everything by what I have them labeled as. So this list of URLs, we're going to copy this list. Another option is to do a unique spreadsheet, and I'll ping that. Just a really simple Excel or Google Sheets formula, and what it'll do is it pull out all the unique URLs in here. So if you had any that were overlapping with your information, doesn't tend to happen with Screaming Frog, but this this will just pull the list of those URLs. And then as well, we can start referencing that data. So this is the H1s, we're pulling them. I'm using them more or less as a label, so I can quickly identify that. If I was talking to somebody above me that doesn't know the URL slug or care about the URL slug, they will remember the SEO URL structure post if I was to mention that instead of saying, the blog post at /SEO-URL-structure. Just makes it a little bit easier for talking up this type of information. And we can pull any information here. Common stuff we'll pull is title, meta description, anything that's going to show up in this Screaming Frog raw crawl will show up. So here's your list of titles in here. If you wanted to get into title length, see which ones are too long. Meta descriptions are all over here. There's There's no meta keywords, which is a good thing. Our first H1, you can see the additional heading structure will come in here as well if you ever need to parse out any of this information. But for this exercise, we're just using the title, or sorry, the H1. Any questions so far? Is it all making sense? Okay. Been told to talk fast, so I'm trying to slow things down and taking pauses here. All right, so we got your list of pages. We're initially pulling in this H1 data just to have it. The next step would be, let's get some free data to make some informed decisions. So a couple pieces of information I like to pull. I'll go into date first. So date is a date stamp that's actually plugged into the XML sitemap. So what I ended up doing was importing the XML sitemap. I'll show you what that looked like. So blog date, excuse me. So the formula for that was this. I'll keep plugging these into the chat. And what that did was extract the XML sitemap and break out the individual tabs that we were paying attention to. So you've got date stamps on here. And the reason why we want to look at date stamps is a lot of this. So I pull a year of information, usually to compare. If something went live, and this one went live November, or had the last modification November 8th, last thing we want to do is kill it. And we can't compare it against something that's had 12 months to exist in blog posts. So it may not have as much traffic, but it hasn't had a time to really mature. So we need to, that's one of our considerations when we're looking at these summaries, is was this content published recently? We don't want to kill it if it doesn't have, excuse me, it hasn't had a chance to perform. So that data gets pulled up in here. I'll quickly filter through, particularly if I'm dealing with like a lot of blog posts, and look for anything that's like older than 2019. So it's really, you can just do a find or a filter down for anything considered that contains 201, and I'll give everything from basically 219 before. And that's an early, like a quick way to find out the old posts and see how they're performing.
So Mike, sorry, just to clarify, anything from 2020 onwards, you're going to keep it regardless of how it's performing? No,
but it would have a better chance of surviving if it's 2020 onwards.
So when you say recent, like if you've made tweaks to it recently or you've published it recently, what is recently for you? 3 months, 6 months?
I would say 3 months, but it would all depend on the data set you're looking at. Something that's existed for 12 months, comparing it to something that's existed for only 3, it's not really fair. So if it's just another factor that would tell me that it's not ready to go, it still needs a little bit more time to perform. It's one of the last ones I look at. I like to look at traffic, conversions, and authority earlier on, because I find those are a lot better indicators than just date. But I want to make sure that date's considered in there as well, so we're not killing something that we just posted a month ago, or we've had juniors work their way through this and they want to kill a blog post that went live like a week ago, and that's the last thing we want to happen, right? All right, great question though, thank you. The next concept I like to look at is Search Console. So, and mainly clicks. So how much traffic we're getting from the search result. And this is before anybody's opting in for tracking, and then impressions as well. So how often are we showing up? Because we could be not getting a lot of clicks, but we're getting a ton of visibility, and we really want to lean into that. There might be opportunities for us to take that visibility that we're showing up in search results, but we're in the 8th position. If we got that to 5th position, that's going to really increase traffic. If we get in the top 3, it's going to really amplify that traffic. This data is pretty straightforward to pull. We can just come into Search Console and we click on the performance report, search results here. You get your data in here. I'll go for the last 12 months. So we're accounting for a little seasonality there, particularly if you're dealing with like e-commerce and they have a spike in Christmas, but if they sell Christmas widgets, they're not selling a lot of them in April. So we were looking at 6 months and it did not include Christmas. It wouldn't be a fair comparison. So we're looking at the last 12 months, and I do this little custom regex mainly to filter out all the blogs that it filters out the blog root, but it keeps all the blog structure in there. So if it's got a blog /blog and then the slug afterwards, it'll be included here. If there's no slug after that, so the root page, then it wouldn't include that. Now, where things get a little messy here is if you don't have this subfolder set up for blog content. And I highly recommend it. It has no real SEO value other than being able to go back and look at from a macro level and spot bigger trends and being able to segment this information a lot cleaner. If your blog hasn't really evolved or you're not getting a ton of traffic, this would be the time to switch to that blog structure so you can parse it out a lot quicker and it'll be able to make bigger decisions around the blog posts. And it just, for these types of exercises, makes it a lot cleaner. You can use tools like Screaming Frog and look for unique identifiers that are set up for the blog, but it's getting really kind of advanced and I wouldn't recommend it. So when we get this information out, we've got all the blog posts here. We're doing about a year of data. We'll export that, and the output is this. And what we want to do is pull the pages tab. So you're going to get a bunch of queries, search appearance, but what I really care about, what pages, how many clicks they're getting, what kind of impressions they're getting. That information will get copied over into GSC raw. And then we use some VLOOKUPs in here to look up this information. And if it's got no traffic, to tab it as not traffic. Then I do some conditional formatting in here as well, so I can quickly spot what the top performing posts are and which ones are not. So like how to add keywords to a website, got to take a look at this one because you'll see it's got like over 100,000 visibility. Gets the most visibility in search results, but it's only led to 77 clicks. So there's probably a big, strong opportunity for us to refine this and get it into a stronger position, or to pay attention to how it looks in the click-through, how it looks in the search results, and how can we increase that click-through rate. Any questions about getting the organic traffic, clicks, and impressions into the spreadsheet? All right, moving on. Conversions. Now, this can be a mixed bag. With our client base, sometimes they're not tracking conversions in GA. I pulled data from GA, and we're not tracking conversions, honestly. So I did some fake goal completions in here, if you're wondering why the conversion rate doesn't track with the completion rate, just so we had some numbers to play with. We have clients that'll be pulling this data in from multiple sources, be it like some sort of CRM or anything along there, and then we'll pull in things like MQLs and MELs and use that information. And you can basically scale this up however you need see fit. So just by copying this over and copying the structure, we can create multiple conversion buckets if we want to look at it from that standpoint. But for simplicity's sake, I kept this one simple. We faked a little bit of conversion data, and we basically went into Google Analytics and looked for landing pages and filtered down for blog. And then, and why we did landing pages, we want them to know that first point of entry. And then as well, how many, and it also has goals. So when we export this list, we get all that information. Now, one thing you would need to pay attention to is it'll only export how many rows you have shown. So if you look at this number down here and you see 60, okay, I want to show rows up to 100. So my one CSV export will work for listing all those pages. And then we pull that information and we plug it in here. Now there's an interesting thing that makes lining up GA and GSC data. So GA being Google Analytics, is GA tends to not include the domain name. So there's not a clean VLOOKUP of the information. So I have to do a little bit of fanciness to make this work. And I'll copy this formula over into the chat as well. And the cool thing about Sheets is, and I mean, maybe Excel does this, I just never work in it. We can do a regex replace, and we're basically telling it to look for, and if you're not familiar with VLOOKUP, so we're vertically looking for this URL, but we're replacing my domain with nothing, so that it'll line up with the way Google Analytics is pulling that information out. So then that makes the variables line up, and then we can pull that information in. Oh, sorry, I want to go on conversions. That's the one I was looking at. And then that information, so we're pulling from A2 to I is the last one that has the completion data, and then we can pull those numbers in there. So last thing we want is something that's converting, that doesn't have a whole lot of traffic, say this post. We wouldn't want to kill it because it could be high intent, bottom of funnel traffic. It's just not going to drive a whole lot of queries. It's not a ton of traffic, but the traffic that's coming is qualified. And the other thing I will say is GA4 does not do the landing page attribution as cleanly, where you can get that conversion data. So this aspect of tracking conversions will not work if you're pulling from GA4 data. So you're going to have to come up with another way of dealing with that, or if you're tracking conversions in a different way. I have been exploring the product Heap Analytics as a potential replacement for my own personal site. And the thought, putting that one in the chat. Great team, doing some really cool stuff. And they have a free package up to 10K monthly searches. So if your personal site's not driving a whole lot of traffic, it could be an initial starting point to work with. Now for our clients, they've got their own systems in place. They're either using GA4 or a combination of this, or they're already using Heap to track this kind of information. All right. And another aspect we like to look at, so we've talked about traffic, we've talked about visibility, we've talked about conversions, is page views. So again, we're using a Google Analytics metric. And what we're trying to determine here is whether or not page has some other purpose that we may not be aware of. For an example, this page right here, Every Decision is a Marketing Decision by Joel Kelly, had 800 page views. So even though it only drove 3 organic clicks, it's part of the user's journey. So we don't want to necessarily kill this. Now, to pull this type of information in, we're back into Google Analytics again, but we're looking at the all pages report now. I'll let this load. We're filtering down for blog again. We've got a year's worth of data. And then we're gonna make this big enough. So we've got 63 here. We can go up to 100. We'll export that information, and then we'll pull it back into here. We're gonna put this one in one called GA Raw. If you want to reference any of the other information, you're more than welcome to. But I'm looking at page views here. I want to make sure that we're not killing something that is potentially drives is part of the user's experience, might have another purpose. Did it drive a pile of social traffic that we weren't aware of? We want SEO to inform things, but we don't want SEO to take over. All right, so that's page views. Any questions about that? All right, the next 2 things I'm going to look at is authority and top keywords. I've used Ahrefs data for this information. It's a paid tool. I think it's about $100 a month US. You can do a lot of this work manually. I do know that links as part of Search Console, I find it's not as accurate as Ahrefs is, but you can export this type of information and cross-reference the amount of links coming in. But the number of links doesn't necessarily equal the authority that a page would hold. And the thought process behind all this is if a page has got an authority, but it's not necessarily driving traffic, it's serving another purpose. You can be transferring that authority from that page to other pages. So it has a purpose that's just not apparent at first sight. So we don't have a whole lot driving authority here. Our URL rankings, how to add keywords to a website is one, and then our Google Search Console performance for beginners post are the 2 that are driving some traffic. Both of them look to be performing as well, so we wouldn't want to kill those. And to pull that information, so Ahrefs. So the place where the best page is by backlink. So if you're in Ahrefs, you can come down here, best by links, and then you just export this information. What you want to use is this URL rating. It's what strength does your page have? Does this one page on your website have? higher it is, the better. The other one I like to pull is referring domains, because they can let you know how many backlinks there are that are pointing back to this page. And then the other piece of information I like to pull from Ahrefs is top keyword. And the thought behind this is, if we've got a page that's in the top, let's say Allison wants to create a website with the clickable elements, was the top keyword, which is really for a guest talk from Allison K Consulting, and it's in the 13th position. Now, I don't necessarily think I'm going to optimize for this one because I can't see the value on it, but just because that query is not so big, I might want to filter that one down and look a little bit deeper. But if you're dealing with a smaller data set, you can also take this information back and backward engineer it into Search Console to find out what kind of keywords are driving it. But first, I'll run you through how I pull that information from Ahrefs so we can pop that up. And and I don't think I showed you, but this is the authority export that we're using for Ahrefs. And the next thing we'll get into is the ranking raw. So we're looking at top pages. If you want to get fancy, you can start filtering out. If you really only care about the US, you can filter this down from all countries to just the US or Canada. Or if like they're very geographical, if you're focusing on India, you can filter down for that. And what it'll do is it'll pull out ones that aren't in there. It'll only focus on the ones you want to focus on. We export this information and we plug it into here, and then we can do the same kind of VLOOKUPs to look up this as the unique identifier, fill in the top keyword, volume, and then position. But let's say we don't have Ahrefs data and we really want to know what something's performing for. So I'm just going to run this one through. And what I would recommend you do is we're going to get rid of some of our filters here. Let's just add this page. In here, still going to look at 12 months. If we were to look at queries, we can find out which ones are driving the most traffic. So GSC report, Search Console performance report, GSC performance, those are the three big ones that are driving it. We can click up here and get average position. We can find out what position they're in. Now, this is averaging it worldwide. So we do want to take a look, consider countries in this as well. We focus a lot on the American market. So I will, by just clicking on these, you can end up filtering down for that specific country. So I've got it filtered now for the US, and I'll jump back into the queries. And now we're finding out GSC performance, Google Search Console performance report. These are the two ones that are driving the most traffic in the US. We're showing up a lot more for the GSC report, but we're also a lot higher in the position. So we're like 4th position. This one we might want to pay attention to because we're in 8th position. Actually check this and in another tool, and we had hit first. Now this is looking at the last 12 months. What I find with rank, you really want to look at like the last 7 days to get an idea, because it's going to aggregate all that information over the last 12 months. So how we were performing in January is going to inform that average. Now looking here, GSC performance not looking as good as it did before, but 5.2. So we know we're in 5th position on average in the US for this page in the last 7 days. When we can get that into the top 3, it's really going to drive some traffic. So I wouldn't want to kill this post. I want to optimize this, particularly when we're looking at something like a 5th position. No worries, Kenny. Thanks for dropping by, man. Is when you're in 5th position, getting up to the top 3 is really just going to amplify that traffic. So yeah, that's how I would dig into keywords if we were dealing with a smaller set of information. If we were, again, dealing with something like more than 500 posts, then I would do this on scale with something like Ahrefs. Moz and SEMrush all have equal reports that would do the same thing. Any questions so far?
I have a question, Mike.
Yeah.
When you say you're figuring out which ones to kill, do you mean totally taking them off your website, or what are you killing and why are you killing them?
I should stop using the word kill. Purge. How's purge for word? No, it means the same. Yeah, we're basically deciding which posts we want to get rid of, and that was the point of this exercise. Is going through and finding the dead weight content. Is another common term we'll use for this post. So for this kind of exercise. So great question, Kelly, because now we're transitioning over into what posts do I want to get rid of in 2023. So if I was to look at this kind of information, I could start filtering down. Let's say just for sake of argument, I'm going to say filtering. There we go. We want only things that have driven some sort of click. So we can click off. Actually, let's clear. Let's see if these posts make sense to get rid of. So we've got 3 posts that have not driven any organic traffic. They're probably likely, I would recommend that we're going to get rid of them. And one, coronavirus, it's going to be a little topical. I don't think anybody needs to know anything else about remote work and coronavirus. We've already been there. How limitations led to creativity and managing client expectations on local search results. Like, we don't even deal with local anymore. These 3 posts to me are initial ideas for getting rid of content. But all these other pieces are going to form that. So we want to make sure that there's none of them have a URL rating, so they can go. No referring domains. They've had a little bit of page views, so they are part of the buyer's journey, but they're not a big part of the buyer's journey. So I'm going to say we're safe in that fact. No conversions, so they're not driving anything there. Looks like we did an update on them in May, but not to a point where it's actually turning into some traffic. The last thing I would check is, do we have a top keyword in a position that we would like to position this? Now, right now, I'm seeing no. So in this spreadsheet, I would say go for all 3 of these. And then I would go through and find a page that makes sense to redirect them to, and then set up and flag that in there. And then we could pass this off to the person that's handling the redirects, be it yourself or somebody else, if you have to leverage a third party to do the redirects. So we could remove this piece of content and we could redirect it. Did I answer your question, Kelly? Kind of. Okay.
Is there any harm in keeping it on your website? Well, what's the harm in keeping it there?
A couple blog posts is not going to make a big difference. When you're dealing with like 10,000 plus pages or a couple hundred, like we had a client back in the end of summer had about 500 blog posts, and doing a process like this, we determined 85 of them drove all the value for the website. So, and there was also some issues with this because they had let a content team kind of run amok with it. And they had done kind of, if you've ever heard the old classic SEO joke, like the SEO walked into a bar, a pub, a watering hole, like they had created pages for every possible variant on this subject. So, and Google's algorithm is smart enough to understand that all those things mean the same thing. So they hadn't concentrated their efforts. So identifying which ones drove the same traffic or the same type of traffic for the same type of queries, we found the one that performed the best. We took the other ones and had them reviewed by a content strategist to determine if there's pieces of this content that could be amalgamated into the main post that we're keeping. Then we deleted those other posts. Let's say there was 3 in total. We redirected the other 2 to the main one that we're keeping. And now we've got a unified approach for those queries and queries like it. So in that case, yes, having multiple pages that are more or less talking about the same thing was not solidifying our approach and was weakening the signals. Another argument, and it can get SEOs up in arms, is crawl budget. I find it only really matters when you're getting into like the 10,000 plus page content sites. But that being said, if you can focus Google's effort on what you actually want to rank and what actually performs, if you had a 500 page website and you got it, or 500 blog posts and you got it down to 80, and these 80 actually resonated with your end users, it helps to position your website as a subject matter expert, or the content on here as expert content around that main subject.
Okay, I understand that. And what about the tools in Ahrefs and SEMrush and stuff where you can go and check the most popular pages and it shows a whole bunch of data with that? How accurate is that compared to what you have in your spreadsheet? Is it similar or is it totally out of whack?
It's all similar. When I pull Ahrefs data, I don't use their traffic indication because their traffic is an assumption based on position and the averages of clicks based on that position. So say something got 1,000 monthly searches and you had 3rd position for it, they would assume, I forget the exact ratios, but let's say 12% of the traffic went to you. That doesn't actually translate, where Google Search Console will give you, it's not, it's a leading indicator, but it's not an absolute. And something like Search Console gets you a little bit closer to that because it's showing you who's actually clicking through based on position. Now, Search Console is still sampled, so it's not 100%, but it's a stronger leading indicator that things are going to perform. So we're using some of those pieces of information, but then we're also using pieces of information that we have directly from the source, Search Console and Google Analytics, to inform our decision making. So something in third position that's getting a lot of clicks but hasn't moved up to first position yet will eventually get there. Or even if it's the bottom of the first page, but it just sticks out to people and it just resonates with the end user and it's driving people to click through, we'll know that that's a driver. Whereas in something like Ahrefs, Moz, or SEMrush, 8th position would not look like a lot of traffic. And the other thing is, if we're in 8th position and we're getting a lot of traffic comparative to how many queries there are for this, with time we are going to go up. At least in our experience, we've seen the position increase, and that just amplifies that. Great question. Thank you. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Any other questions about this process or content audits?
You talked about which ones to get rid of. Are you going to talk about which ones to tackle first in terms of improving, for example?
Yeah, great question. So what I'll do is I'll go over and I'll take position here as our main filter now. So one thing I'll look at, we'll filter by condition, is between, let's do 3 and 11. Oh, there we go. So these posts have a top keyword in 3rd to 6th or 3rd to 11th position. This is telling me it's getting eyes on it because it's in the search results. Now, particularly our clients are mostly desktop-based users too. So I consider a lot of this in the desktop SERP. If it was mobile, it would probably be only the top 3 positions what I consider optimizing for click-through rate. So I would focus on what do the search results for these types of queries look like and how can I differentiate myself. We actually looked at this one on Monday. And if I was to run GSC report, now we do better in Canada than we do in the US. You'll see we're up here. I was thinking about, I could break this out into how-to schema and get some cards down here. And what that would do is draw the eye, particularly in the US where we're in more of a middle pack scenario. I'm not necessarily optimizing this piece of content. I might still explore to see what the other search results look like. But the big opportunity here when it's on the first page, but not necessarily driving clicks, is getting eyes on it in the search results so it gets more clicks and gets a higher position. So that's the first thing I would look at. The other thing I would look at is I would go from 10 to 20. And these ones, we want to optimize a little bit stronger. So if we get that Allison one back again, Allison wants to create a website with clickable elements. If we would optimize content like this that's sitting on the 2nd page and beyond to try to get it into the first page. We'd also look at authority opportunities to build up the backlink portfolio so that we can strengthen those signals to get it from the 2nd page onto the first page. And then when we get it onto the first page, we can focus on click-through rate. So we're optimizing to get to the first page, and then we're optimizing content and those ranking signals to get into the first page, and then we're paying attention to what how it shows in the search results to increase its click-through rate when it's on the first page to try to get into a better position. And the same argument can be made for 2nd page and beyond from an optimization standpoint. It's just going to be a longer play. So that's how I would prioritize things. I'd look at click-through rate first because you're going to get some strong returns right off the bat. Then I would look at striking distance, so 2nd page onward. So we can optimize to get them on the first page and then monitor to see when they hit that first page and then go back and look at click-through rate. And then I'd start looking at the ones that are 2nd page and beyond.
Can I ask another question?
Oh, 100%, please do.
With this example here, you said you'd go back and you'd optimize it more. And I'm assuming when it was posted, you optimize it. Are you going back and changing some of what you optimize it for? Like you choosing a different, are you changing something that you chose originally, or what are you optimizing now that it's up there? Or are you just refreshing it?
Refreshing it, optimizing it, but looking to see kind of what, like, is there exact phrase queries we could go for? Is there other variants of the query that we can mention in there? One thing I will say about this type of content, because this is an output from somebody doing a talk, we didn't optimize for it other than just general SEO best practices. We released it into the wild just as is because the content had already been created. And it's also a guest spot. It's somebody else writing it. So it gets a little messier when we're trying to optimize these ones. I don't want to misrepresent what they're doing. So if I was to optimize this, I would tie this into an authority play as well, reach out to the original author and going, hey, we're trying to get this post better positioned. We're going to change a few things here. Wanted to see what you're thinking. Would you like to have some input on this post as well? And that way it's a bit of an ego bait play. They're part of the content process, and they're more likely to share it on their own social media when they're ready to go live, or when you're ready to publish this new one. Yeah, we would optimize in best case scenario as it goes out. But if it's user generated content, I tend to, or like stuff where we've talked to the sales team and we're just trying to figure out what the common questions are, I would release it as is and go back a month later to see what traction it's getting and work with what Google's associating it with instead of trying to set it at the get-go.
So you're adding content to it.
Refining it.
Yeah, okay.
Depends what the search results look like. If it's a 500-page post and there's an opportunity to make this, or 500-word post, excuse me, and there's opportunities to make it more involved, or there's other subject matter that the top ones talk about that we don't talk about, we would create those as new parts of it, or provide direction for people to create it like that.
Okay.
Great question. Any other questions?
So did I hear you right, Mike? For stuff that's showing up on the first page, you want to look at which ones have decent click-through rates. But what do you do if it doesn't have a good click-through rate?
We're trying to find ways to increase its click-through rate. So how can we draw the eye to it? For like this one, for an example, I was talking about schema, but it could be like, are we getting truncated in the results? What do the other results look like? Like our result in here is doing well because it's Google's just churning out reports at a glance. Like this is more or less automated, right? Where this is more speaking to the end user. This is geared for people that actually know how to use Search Console. I don't know if anybody's ever used Google support, but I find it frustrating if I'm coming in net new. It's only really useful if I've already know the product and I'm coming in. Our post is being a little earlier stage for somebody using Search Console. So how do I read this GSC performance report? The fact that it's talking about this how-to aspect of it could be leading more people to click through. There's opportunities for me to make a video on this and mark that up with schema. We could get a potential thumbnail in here. And that thumbnail is going to draw the eye and increase click-through rate. Star ratings are another one that we've leveraged in the past, where if you get star ratings in the search result, you get little yellow stars and a wall of blue and black text on white. Those little yellow stars really draw the eye. So if they're like third, fourth position, people are like, oh, what's that? And then they read more on it, click through. Now with that increased click-through rate, that tends to lead to a higher position.
Yeah. And for the stuff hitting the second page, you said look for authority opportunities. You said something else as well I didn't catch.
General optimization. I'd be more involved in my optimization, taking a look at that content, finding out what differentiates us from the pack. Like what can we do that the first page isn't doing? What do the first page results look like? What can we answer? What are they doing that we're not? What can we do that they're not? And want to like a mixture of all that.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
How often do you do the audit?
We've been trying to get into a monthly cadence, or not a monthly, sorry, an annual cadence. So this is my time of year to do it. December's are slow. There's a new content initiative in January. This can inform what's going to get refined, tell us what we're going to kill, purge, and also let us know a little bit where we might have gaps and we want to fill those. So it's a good way to kick off January, particularly if you come into January with a bunch of refinement projects and people are just getting off the Christmas break and they're not quite into it and they just need to go in and do kind of, I call it podcast work. You got a 3-hour podcast and 10 blog posts to do some simple tweaks too. You can go in and kind of do more refinements, where net new content I find is a little bit more involved. Requires teams like yourself, Emily, or in-house people to be able to generate this content. So maybe a little bit less podcast focused and more actually podcast listening focused. Not that podcast is not a good content initiative. So yeah, I like to run them in December when it's a little bit slower and use that information to inform the early work in January as we're ramping up other campaigns.
And do you use a very similar spreadsheet when you're reviewing stuff on a monthly or quarterly basis to see what needs to be tweaked?
I would still look at a year, even if I was doing it quarterly. The main reason why I want to look at a year is to account for seasonality. It's not fair to look at November and December and compare it to, let's say, September. I don't know if that's a really good analogy or not, but like you just don't want to look at the wrong time frame and kill something that could be performing. Well, I did a project a while ago for a client that did a lot of recipes, and there were all a lot of holiday recipes. We couldn't look at any information except for from pretty much American Thanksgiving till December. That's when all their traffic got driven. But we always looked at the full year too, because they did have a few things for recipes in the summer that really would kick things off. But I do use a similar one. I'll pull in other data sources. I like to get 3 or 4 data sources. I wanted to simplify this version of it so people could use it without a whole pile of data sources. There are a few tools like SEOtesting.com that takes the GSC data and will parse it out and give you queries based on page, which out of the box Search Console doesn't do. So I like to have that source in there along with Ahrefs, because we can associate the actual clicks for a query and sort by the top query for clicks, not just based on position and their assumed traffic amount based on position volume and what those averages are for those positions.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah. That's the general gist of how I perform a content audit. Wow, I've never come this close to the timing. Any other questions either one of you have?
That's it for me. Thank you very much, Mike.
My pleasure. Awesome to have you both in here, and I'll let you have 8 minutes back of your day. I got to do the general spiel of like Digital Nova Scotia for sponsoring us. If you're not